I'm going to use this guide to writing learning outcomes as an example to illustrate the difference between aims and learning outcomes. Aims are aspirational in that they describe teacher or program intentions. They're broad statements of intent that illustrate the overall purpose of the program, and in that respect they don't need to be measurable. Learning outcomes, on the other hand, more specifically describe student behaviour. They're more precise and describe what it is that a successful learner will be able to do by the end of a specified part of a program. In that respect, the learning outcomes should be demonstrable and measurable. In other words, we should be able to assess them. So let's have a look at this guide in a little bit more detail. In terms of the aims that we had for this guide, we were hoping to increase our understanding of the purpose of learning outcomes in relation to teaching, and particularly to assessment. We were also hoping to raise the awareness of the implications of the requirements set out in EQUAL for our current learning outcomes and assessment strategies. So these are two aspirations. What they don't do is communicate to you what we hope you'll be able to do as a result of using the guide. In that respect, we might write the learning outcomes for the guide as follows. On completion of the session, you should be able to write well-structured learning outcomes for your units that communicate to your students what they're expected to do and achieve. Also, that you'll be able to align teaching, learning and assessment activities with learning outcomes in your units. And overall, that you'll be able to revise your current learning outcomes and assessment practice to units across your programme to meet the requirements set out for the new credit structures as prescribed by EQUAL. It might actually be argued that this learning outcome here actually encompasses both of these two learning outcomes. So some people might argue that we only actually need one learning outcome, and that if you were able to do this, it assumes that you can do both of these two. Also, I think that the main thing to point out here is that I hope that it's quite easy to see how we might assess each of these learning outcomes. We could get you to go away and write some learning outcomes to produce an alignment map of your learning, teaching, assessment activities and learning outcomes. We could also get you to complete a review of your programs and produce the required documentation that's prescribed by EQUAL. So we could quite easily set you tasks that would allow us to assess whether or not you were able to meet those learning outcomes. So in that respect, they're useful to us as teachers, but they're also useful to you as students of this particular guide in giving you an idea of what we will hope you will be able to achieve as a result of using the guide. In that respect, I should point out that you quite often see in learning outcomes the sort of terminology that we have here in the aims of understanding and awareness. These are a little bit ambiguous and obviously difficult to measure, and they're best avoided in learning outcomes. One of the best ways that this was described to me was by a colleague who explained that it's possible to go into a primary school class and give them a session on global warming, and those young children would be able to understand the principles that were presented to them. We could also go into a postgraduate master's programme and give them a session on global warming, and they would equally well understand what was covered. However, we're probably expecting a different level of understanding from the master's students than we are to the undergraduate, than the primary school students. So in that respect, the use of these terms in learning outcomes doesn't help us to articulate what we might expect the students to be able to do. In that particular example, for primary school kids, you might be able to get them to make a list of all of the things that they could do at home to save energy. So for example, switching off lights and things like that. But with the postgraduate students, you would expect them to perform much more complex tasks to demonstrate their understanding of global warming. Perhaps an evaluation of government policy, for example, on electricity supply and the impact that has on global warming. So we're expecting completely different things, and that would be articulated through learning outcomes.